Hi, good morning, Indrajit.
Hi, Deepa. Lovely to be here.
Yeah, welcome and to our audience. We are now on one more episode of the Lumiere Learning Monday, and this time we have Indrajit as our Learning Monday guest, founding Fuel, as well as so many very illustrious career as a business journalist with he worked with the Forbes magazine. Before that, I think the Economic Times as well.
Yes, that's right.
What a delight and what an honor it is to have you here today.
No, it's a privilege to be here too, Deepa. Great respect for what you're doing at Lumiere, so it's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. You know, Indrajit, I don't think we ever spoke of this, but the first time I heard your name mentioned was when we were sitting at the Market Research Society of India boardroom, and we were as the committee members going to be doing our first MRSI conference, which was targeted to the financial services industry. And at that time, somebody said, hey, we need to get in touch with media. So, who should we be getting in touch with? And somebody said, oh, but don't you know, doesn't anybody know Indrajit Gupta at Eco Times? And, I was quiet, though my dad had worked with the Times of India, and I didn't know you, and I really hadn't ever in that sense accessed a journalist for anything. So I kept quiet. And I was thinking this morning, preparing for this talk, when did I first hear your name? And that was when
Yeah.
so lovely to have you here.
Thank you.
What an illustrious journey. Did you know as a little boy that you wanted to write or do journalism? Or...
Deepa, there's a story behind that I have to share. I grew up in Calcutta, as you know, grew up in a joint family, very culturally vibrant. Went to school at La Martiniere and St. Xavier's College after that, before I moved to Bombay. And I want to kind of spend a minute or so about something that happened there that, frankly, I had no clue that I'd pick journalism as a career. And the only thing I knew that I loved newspapers. I grew up in a generation where the Telegraph had just come into its own under M.J. Akbar in Calcutta,
Oh, wow.
right? And that was a big deal as someone young who was growing up at that time. His paper, Telegraph, had a huge impact on our lives. And I remember maintaining that as scrapbook, and people in class used to joke at school, used to pull my leg, saying that, this is Mr. Clippings. And I used to maintain all the clippings in that scrapbook because they produced a really vibrant paper. And my parents belonged to the statesman generation, right?
Yes.
Which was slightly more traditional, conservative, but brilliantly edited as well. But Telegraph came like a breath of fresh air. It brought the whole world. Rajiv Gandhi was at that point in time coming into his own. M.J. Akbar did some brilliant work with his team. So fast forward to 89, I moved to Bombay. I had this whole belief that I wanted to get into HR, right? So I applied to TIS, right? Because I thought TIS had that kind of, purpose and passion really to produce great managers who were focused on people.
Yeah.
And I did quite well at the admission process. But at the interview, one of the panelists there, and they put me through a stress interview, which I didn't do too well and eventually didn't qualify. But one of the panelists, they asked me, look, I saw the essay that you wrote. Are you sure you don't want a career in writing? So I said, writing? That's not something that I've even thought of. I wanted to apply to TIS. That's why I've come here all the way from Calcutta. But I don't know what they saw. They clearly saw that, there was someone who was pretty adept at expressing himself and writing cleanly and well. But I didn't think too much about it, honestly. And I went ahead and applied to SP Gen, as you know, where you went as well, Deepa. And I came out with something that I really wanted to do, which was advertising. But 2 years into advertising, I felt that this wasn't quite what I really hoped. And In fact, you were talking about your dad working in Times of India. I spent 1 year before business school at Times of India Response as well. But nowhere did journalism really come up, although I did interact with a lot of editors at the Times of India because my uncle used to write a column. So I had this fascination of taking my column to some of the editors, and it was a big thrill at that time. But 2 years into JWT, HTA, I thought I'd kind of make the move to get into journalism. It seemed like a crazy thing to do, but I took the plunge. And there's a story there too, but I'll come to that later. I don't think I've looked back since then. So this was 94, I think, 93, 94.
Awesome. Indrajit, for some reason, your video just started to scramble a little bit. I'm just wondering about the network.
Okay.
Do you want to just see on the settings if your video resolution is standard? Maybe it's pulling a little more bandwidth. I don't know. Suddenly, I mean, it was like absolutely fine. Just a minute ago, the video started to. You want to just come out and log in again, maybe?
Yes, I'll do that. I'll do that. Sorry
Please.
about this. Huh?
No problem.
Yeah.
So for our audience who joined in late, I'm talking to Indrajit Gupta, who's a business journalist and editor with over 2 decades of experience. He's the founding editor of the Indian edition of, he was the founding editor of the Indian edition of Forbes magazine. And he's now the co-founder and director at Founding Fuel. He set up Founding Fuel on 16th March 2016. Come back, Indrajit, all fine.
Yeah, all better. Okay, sorry about that.
Yeah, that was a great story. I mean, to believe, and were you also into these Bonvita quiz contests? Because I remember we used to listen to Bonvita, and the name La Martiniere was really etched in our mind because they were always the finalists.
Yes. So a lot of my friends were on the team, of course, and they won it. I think we won it 3 years consecutively around the time when I was kind of graduating. So those are very fond memories, and many of them were superb quizzers. Calcutta was a quizzing hub, as you know.
Yes.
With Neil O'Brien and his sons, of course, after that. So I retained some of it. I went into business quizzing. So that was something that I did at SPGen, and we won a couple of prizes as well. Yes.
Okay. So when you were doing, all the you kind of said 2 years advertising, and then you said, this wasn't it. So what was that call? What is it that you were, what was that sort of dissatisfaction or that seeking that had started in you?
Yeah, I think it was about intellectual stimulation, because if your mind is, I had the good fortune of having kind of lived with my uncle and aunt in Bombay when I moved here for the first time. And he was a stalwart in the management education space, apart from being a fantastic business leader as well, Tarun Gupta. So TG, as he was called, I think trained a whole many generations of folks through Bajaj. He used to teach strategic marketing. So I got all of that stimulus at home. And I went into class with him as well, 3 years from 93, 94, 95. And it was amazing. But at the workplace, it was more of the same, very predictable, not enough professionalism, unfortunately. Advertising was starting to somehow go downhill in terms of being able to stand up and believe in what you really believe in. If you believe that you are something that adds value, and this whole point of being customer-centric, I wasn't experiencing that really. So the mind was ticking, but the work at the workplace wasn't exciting enough. So, and it was just another go-for's kind of job. So carrying artworks to clients and working with so all that is good. I don't think I'm going to take away from all of that. I learned a fair bit about strategic planning, definitely. But I think there was the heart and the mind was both yearning for something more.
Amazing. And on the side, were you also writing? Were you like a journal? Did you write journals and, like a personal journaling and stuff?
No, not really. I mean, I do remember exchanging a lot of mails with my brother, who had just come back to Calcutta in 81 after finishing his MBA at IIM Ahmedabad, and he was the bright one in the family. I wasn't. But yes, I mean, that was a period of deep reflection through the letters that one exchanged with him. I think I did sharpen my writing, but as I said, a lot of focus on essay writing, and I did write a lot of letters to the editor as well, which was, when I think about it, quite embarrassing, but those were part of the growing up days, I think.
Amazing. And then the newspaper happened. So do you remember like your first big interview, which you say like your first break where you were going to be doing a story? And tell me about that
Yeah,
experience.
yeah, it's Business Standard, where I joined, was a very small outfit at that point in time, but I could see from the outside that they were doing some breathtaking work in pushing the boundaries of journalism, business journalism. They had a brilliant team, very small compared to the elephant in the room, which is Economic Times. And I did have an offer from Economic Times, but I ended up with Business Standard, right? And they believed that you had to be thrown into the deep end. I was working at that point in time with the strategist, right, which was Business Standards Management Weekly. It was a pullout, very printed in art paper and all of that. And I still remember, I think it was a story on Old Spice, right? Yes, Procter and Gamble. And you know how difficult it is to get anything out of Procter and Gamble, right? They are absolutely tight-lipped. They will never talk about strategy. So that's when I had to really learn to be resourceful and figure out how to research a story without getting direct access to the company. They did reply. I think they responded to a set of questions, but no formal meetings. I think it was when it got published, I think there was a lot of feedback that came in immediately saying that, wow, I mean, I don't know how you were able to piece together so many different facets. And I then went on to cover where you worked, Hindustan Lever, for many years after that, because I used to do a lot of work on consumer packaged goods companies. And Lever was, of course, the bellwether company at that time. So, yes, I mean, it was quite baptism by fire. But I think the whole art of interviewing, there was one interview that I did in the first year, which I still remember went on for 6 hours.
Wow.
Right? So the whole thing of listening very, very carefully and not rushing people like television journalists tend to do. We were very patient. We would kind of know what we were seeking, but draw out the best from the person we were interviewing. That was a very, very good training. And the difficulty of getting any information, even ORG data was not easily available, as you know, right? In those days, you had to know someone to be able to access all of that. So both data and insights, and figuring out a way to cut to the chase, and that was the speciality of the strategist. It had a loyal following, actually, in business schools as well as in senior management as well. So it was great start in that sense. Couldn't have asked for more.
And can I ask you who that 6 hour long interview?
Yeah, it was a pharma company, I think, or was it electrical? ESAB, I think, the CEO of ESAB. I still remember his office in Worli, and he survived. So did I. We took a break for, I think, about 15-20 minutes in the middle, 3 hours. But it was amazing. He was talking, I think, about his M&A strategy and all of that. So it was quite detailed, and one really had to understand that well. So it was great fun. But that was the beauty of that period, that you could write on steel one day, soaps the other, consumer durables maybe. It cut across, because it was a management weekly, and we looked for insights across businesses and across sectors. So that was fantastic, because a lot of people start journalism and they start specializing very quickly. Here you got the width really to explore and do stories that were really in depth. So So you had to push the envelope in that sense.
And when you were doing that work at Business Standard, I mean, just for my own, for our, even for our readers, listeners, what kind of collaboration do you have with a team? Do you have a team? Do you work by yourself? Where you're doing the research, you're doing the interview, you're then putting the analysis, you're writing your report? How does it happen?
Yeah, so I think you work very closely with the team, but the key person is really the editor that you're working with. In my case, I had the good fortune of working with the two editors who then went on to really, I mean, do extremely well in their careers. So I was lucky to have learned the ropes under them. Tony Joseph, who became the editor of Business Standard after that, Business World after that. He was our features editor. And then Proshenjit Datta, who went on to become the editor of Business Today, and he's a mentor as well. So that relationship, and they're pretty tough taskmasters, and it's great to have someone like that at the early stage of one's career. It was a small team, and I think that was the beauty of Business Standard, that you had small teams working very, very collaboratively and very agile and responsive, but very bright people. Some of them were from IIT Kanpur, who'd gone into journalism. I met my wife there as well. So she joined us from the Economic Times, where she worked with the brand equity. But it was a very, very collaborative. The good thing about research, Deepa, is that there was no Google, right?
Yeah.
So we had a brilliant librarian all the way back in the ABP Anand Bazar Patrika office in Calcutta, Dr. Shakti Roy. He was a marvelous man, right? And he still is there. Right? And I speak to him on occasion. And all you had to do was call up Dr. Roy and tell him, look, what you're working on, right? And lo and behold, one day later, there would be a envelope, a brown envelope with clippings photocopied of all the stuff, whether it was soap or steel or what have you. It would miraculously land up on your desk, and you had to furtively, quickly kind of read up all that stuff and be ready for your interviews, right? I mean, people now are indeed fortunate to have the kind of databases, Bloomberg terminals, and which we did in ET. And
Yes.
the funny part was that no one was using it when I joined as resident editor. Not enough people. So we had to get them trained and all of that. So I'm saying that I think we've grown up in a scarcity, age of scarcity. So I think you learn a few things because of that.
And what do you think in your journalism career was like a defining moment? Is there anything that you can tell our listeners?
Yes, I think 2008, when I was at the Economic Times, I was the resident editor, and we were facing off against Mint, which had just launched in 2007, as you know. I had an offer to join as founding editor of the Forbes magazine in India. So Network 18 at that point in time had the franchise for running the Forbes brand in India, and they wanted me to join as the founding editor and set it up from scratch. I frankly didn't think twice, because this was a great opportunity, because it was something I'd never done. I'd been part of established organizations, but I'd studied those organizations, and I felt that, hey, there was something I could do and put together a great team that would make it happen. And the brief was amazing, saying that how do you create a world-class magazine out of India, right? We kept looking at Fortune in the US, Time in the US, NYT. Those were things that got discussed in the journalist community. Why should we not be able to do it ourselves here out of India? So I don't think there was any question. That was, to my mind, the defining moment when I had that opportunity.
Amazing. And to even be so both ambitious, prescient, courageous, I think it called for all of those values, Indrajit. And did you seek advice or input from any mentors at that time?
Lots of them.
Crossroads?
Lots of them, Deepa, because I think it was a very difficult time as well, because the 2008 financial crisis had just happened. And even when setting up Forbes, frankly, there were quite a few serious intellectual challenges to grapple with. Capitalism had been given a bad name post the crisis. Fortune had gone to the extent of pulling off all CEOs from the cover because people were so upset with what had happened. People had lost homes, they'd eroded their nest egg, all of that, right? So we really had to think hard, and I think Arun Naira, um, Shiv Kumar at ITC, there were many very, very thoughtful people who came in and spoke to us and the entire team, actually, the startup team, to really help us figure out how to reframe capitalism in this new world from an Indian lens, right? So that our readers would in some way stand to benefit. And that how do you make capitalism a force for good in some ways, right? So that was certainly, and we've continued. Many of them are contributors now at Founding Fuel. The intense relationships that we set up there. So I owe a lot to many of them who really helped me think through at very crucial moments of my journey in some ways.
There's a lovely comment from Vasumati in response to your Dr. Roy comment, Shakti Roy comment. So, thank you, Vasu, for that. Yes.
Absolutely.
All of us remember our librarians. We had a wonderful librarian in S.P. Jain, who then went away to the British Council. All of us knew her, and
yes,
Bharti. So
yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. Similarly, in St. Xavier's, Bombay, we had again amazing librarians who made such a big difference. Like you say, just so resourceful in getting you what you needed. I tried to play a role of librarian at Lumiere, Indrajit. Just
yes, yes, absolutely.
It's my
so
favorite.
we have a WhatsApp group at Founding Fuel where people kind of post. So we've kind of now moved to a curated kind of model that helps everyone contribute to knowledge and things that people ought to read and watch and all of that. So
I'm also very curious as a fellow reader. Do you also speed read now? Did you train yourself to do speed reading?
I think so. I'd had to, because I think clearly with digital, I think all our media consumption has kind of gone up 5x, 10x, which is a huge boon for journalism as well, if you think about it. And there's so much happening in the world. So, how on earth do you keep on top of things? So one way to do this is like what I just described, which is depend on other colleagues to really recommend good stuff to you to read. But time is really precious. So how do you get the maximum bang for your buck? And also, spend time a little reflecting on what you've read, because what's happening is that people are on steroids, right? When it comes to learning. Some of them were attending at the beginning of the lockdown. You might remember people were reading and attending 3 webinars in a day or at least 5 in a week and all of that. But I think we're realizing that we've got to slow down as well, even while learning. So speed reading is good, but I think retention and reflection are as critical, Deepa.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's very sage advice. Thank you, Indrajit. When we interview people, Indrajit, there is a shift that happens in our consciousness, in degrees, and then they leave you a little altered. And I'm sure this happens over time and so subtly that if we didn't sort of keep record, we might not even realize these shifts. Which were some of those, almost paradigm shifting interviews that you did of people that you heard talk to?
That's a good one. I think it'll. He's no more, but Dr. Shumantra Ghoshal was someone who had, I think, the power of words, who had the ability to persuade you to a new idea. And I remember doing 2 or 3 rounds of interviews. One was as soon as he had taken over as the founding dean at ISB. He was in New York at the McKinsey office, and I was in Bombay, and his articulation of his vision for management education and how to make it really come alive in India was simply amazing. I still remember those key words of management as a force for good,
Yeah.
right? This was what, I forget the exact year now, but he was a powerhouse in some ways. And I think before this, had talked about C.K. Prahlad as well. He too was a similar, powerhouse of ideas, and the sheer passion with which they wanted to make their presence and impact felt. He was doing a lot of work with your old company, HUL, at that time, in the Sunlever. And this whole, so he was not an ivory tower sort of person. He would come down to the ground and solve real problems facing, and his whole bottom of the pyramid thing we all familiar with, right? Very, very influential and thoughtful, and essentially mobilizing many of his students, right, from to really step up and kind of lead. I still remember Rama Bijapurkar, whom we all know, talking about that, saying that, look, he would not allow us to take it easy. He would constantly goad you to do things and make things happen. That's what leadership is about, to my mind, right? So Sumanta Ghoshal and C.K. Prahlad are two of my favorite gurus, and unfortunate that both are gone so early.
Yeah, left a body of work and institution
Amazing.
for us to.
Amazing, absolutely.
Indrajit, when did the idea of your own venture first come to you? Was there a moment, or was it brewing?
Yeah, I don't. It took some time, honestly. Not for any other reason, because I spent about 5 lovely years building out Forbes India, and I think it was reaching a point where the management had other ideas in terms of what they wanted to do, which would, we believed, start chipping away at the core, right? What you build, if you're not going to be able to preserve it in the pristine form that it needed to be maintained, it was better to jump out and do something on your own, right? But it took some time, because this was a completely new journey, as it were. With none of us had been entrepreneurs, and to do it at a rather late stage in life was also to some extent intimidating. But I think we were very clear about what we wanted to build, and I think eventually, I think we launched in 2015, but we spent a fair bit of time mulling over from, say, around 2013 to 14, giving shape to the idea, tossing around lots of ideas and junking many of them because we felt it wasn't working. In hindsight, we should have perhaps gone with a MVP, a minimum viable product, much earlier, right? There is this whole desire to launch a perfect product, which I'm sure, identify with. We succumb to that. And if there was something I would do differently, I would jump in and build it iteratively based on customer feedback. And that's the game that I think we've learned at Founding Fuel. So that even if you have a seed of an idea, try and kind of get it out there in the market in some form or shape. It doesn't have to be a perfect product, right? And then try and use customer feedback to try and iterate and develop it. Works brilliantly.
And then you had COVID happen. So in your fourth year of Founding Fuel, I guess everything started to go into a churn, and you all pivoted beautifully. So tell us what you all started to do differently at Founding Fuel.
Yeah, at COVID, I just set quick context to where we were likely to see as clear differentiators from a Founding Fuel journey, because COVID in some ways gave us the second wind, as it were. But essentially, the two hypotheses that we opened with. One is that we were trying to fuse media with learning. So storytelling is the essence of media. How do we fuse storytelling and try and kind of bring in active forms of learning, which is a adjacency to media in some ways, because we read and watch and listen to learn as well, right? So how do you kind of fuse the two with a very strong multimedia kind of character? So journalism was stuck in some ways in a form, right? Either you were seen as print journalists, or you were a television journalist, or someone did podcasts, right? Now, how do you bring all of this in an integrated sort of way, which was what was one of the challenges. The other was to give shape to this new um, um, uh, beast, where we were trying to fuse media and learning. And I think the operating hypothesis there was that, think about it. I mean, all of us, and you've been on your entrepreneurial journey, Deepa, as well. And there's something which is magical about how entrepreneurs learn, right? It seems very messy from the outside, very chaotic, but there is a certain method in that madness. That's what we were trying to, in some ways, recreate inside Founding Fuel. How that whole entrepreneurial learning approach, which is iterative, which is about taking some risks, testing the waters, putting back the learnings all over again. So that's what, at the end of the day, we said we would hold up as the magic portion, as it were, the central idea, which is that there's an entrepreneurial mindset that we need to bring to the table as leaders, and that will help us deal with uncertainty and ambiguity that pervades all our lives. I mean, the lockdown is a perfect example of that. Businesses, leaders were pitchforked into the lockdown without having a clue of what they could do, right? Whether you were an MBA or a chartered accountant or any other professional, you really did not have the answers. So now how do you operate, right? It mimicked the world, and it kind of accelerated the whole forces of change, right? And it forced us to adapt, right? Because this is not available in a textbook, right? Yeah, so you'd have to find your own rules. A lot of people struggled with it because I think they'd become rigid. They had stopped learning. They were struggling to adapt to Zoom calls. How do you engage employees on Zoom, right? How do you manage people that you can't even see, right? How do you recreate organizational trust in a virtual kind of setting? These are fundamental questions. And the whole point about asynchronous work, right? It takes a very different kind of skill set, mindset, tools as well to make asynchronous work easy. It's not. For a lot of people who were used to working in a physical setting, right, in very close proximity, where you could just hop across to someone's room and solve a problem by chatting for about 15, 20 minutes, gone, boom, overnight. And of course, so we, I think, saw the writing on the wall fairly early in March. And we quickly made the transition as a small team, and our team is distributed. We've never worked in a physical office ever in Founding Fuel. We do have a co-working space, which we use largely for client meetings, for our own internal conversations when we need to meet. But most of the work is done remotely, right, virtually. So a team, people in Noida, Bangalore, Bombay, seamlessly kind of working across 1 year now, right? 2 stand-up meetings in a day at 8:30 and at 5:30. You need some rituals. Also an opportunity to really come together and talk about what we're experiencing, like the next lockdown, which is around the corner in Bombay, right? Which we did this morning as well. But also discuss work and and that has acted as a glue, honestly, for the team to be able to, share things that are really weighing people down on an everyday basis. But and each member steps up and helps solve someone else's dilemmas and troubles. It could be aging parent at home who's not keeping well, or a friend who's going through some mental stress. There are many things, and so it's been actually the most productive 1 year in our existence, and we've done some amazing amount of creative work, right? Which I don't think would have. I think we sensed an opportunity that digital learning would become center stage,
Yeah.
and this was the moment. And startups have to recognize when that happens, right? So that was in a nutshell our our journey, Deepa.
Amazing, amazing. And Indrajit, you have always uh, been in touch with learning through even teaching. You've been associated with academia at the SPJIMR. Strategy is a subject that you teach and you love. Where does, in this whole your time, I mean, and how do you sort of prioritize? How do you do all of these things that you do? I'm very curious. And because teaching is a lot of study, and there's a lot of commitment after and even during.
Yes. So, Deepak, I am not the sort of person who enjoys standing up and giving lectures. I have never enjoyed that, even when I was kind of working as a teaching assistant at Bajaj in '93, right, for the strategic marketing class. We would, as teaching assistants, be attached to small groups of students as they worked on their action learning projects, right? It could be a brand, it could be and they would work with me till way past midnight at YMCA where I stayed, or in office where I worked in Atlanta building in Narman Point. I learned so much. So making time is never a constraint. You just have to prioritize it, right? And teaching just opens up your mind in such amazing ways. But if there was one aspect of teaching that I really enjoy, it's this whole project-based, action learning oriented, which is again now come into our Founding Fuel DNA as well, because that's what we stand for, saying that that's the best way to learn, when you kind of step up and try and kind of work on problems, right? So that is in some ways, again, when I ask a lot of smart people that how many people in your batch are remain curious, right? Remain mentally agile, right? Guess what the answer usually is? 5 to 7%. And these are people from IITs and the IIMs, and the SPJs and the Bajajas of the world, right? Who've been to premier institutions, right? Why is that? Sorry, did we lose audio?
No, I can hear you. Yeah.
Okay.
I just muted myself. There was some.
Yeah, no problem. No problem. So I think there is a deficit somewhere. People do need to realize that a business school education is great, but it is about continuous learning, right? How do you kind of build that kind of a mindset and invest that time? And that's the journey I've enjoyed. But I do notice a lot of people around me who don't do that. And somewhere along the line, I think there is often a wake-up call, right? When people realize,
Yeah, no, I think you make a very strong case with all of the things you say to stay open, learningful, keep iterating. If you have the idea, don't let go of it, put it out there, let it get tested, socialize it, look at various pieces of data all over the place. And today we have access to unlimited information, 10x of what used to be available in the pre-Google era that we grew up in.
Yes.
And sort of work with it, and
Yes.
to stay curious, most importantly, all along. I think very, very powerful. You've always sort of been a trend spotter as well as a trend maker in a sense. What is it, for you personally, the next 5, 10 years of your journey is going to be? What, Indrajit, have you given it thought?
I have. They're fuzzy as they should be, but I do enjoy engaging with young people and acting as some kind of a guide and a mentor. And I think a lot of them are struggling too in some ways. Yesterday, I had a 1.5 hour call with someone who's worked for about 6 years in tech and now wants to look at an MBA. And she works in Australia with an IT firm there. And she has millions of questions in terms of how to think about the future. That's an area that I really believe that I can add value. And I've trained myself as a coach as well. Um, um, and Um, and so that's an area of deep interest. And of course, the founding fuel journey it's still starting. I still believe we should have the beginner's mindset to really have the ability to discover and explore. We love doing that as a team. I think rather than settle down into a very regular kind of way of working. But I think in terms of building a strong, supportive business model, that's something we've got to work on at Founding Fuel, though that's an immediate priority because that's what will make it sustainable, right? And at some stage, I think Charles and I might look at developing the next line of leadership. I think that's going to be critical. We're not getting any younger, and I think there are enough and more bright people out there who can take over from us. We keep cribbing about people who don't ever give up, even at the age of 70 and 80, right, in corporate India. We have to, in some ways, think about our transitions as well at some point. And doing it early, I think, is a good idea in some ways, right?
Indrajit, you've received awards and you have been decorated. So the chevening, I think, pretty early in your career, then the Polestar Journalism Award. What do awards mean to Indrajit?
No, it's obviously exciting to be recognized for one's work, but I think more than awards, I place a lot more value on the people that I worked with and groomed. I think that's the best statement that I can kind of that's the badge of honor that I really care about, and people who have worked with me have gone on to do incredible things. Many of them, and they become authors, they become editors-in-chief and in some global magazines. So I think they've enjoyed that stint. I pushed them hard. I can be a very tough taskmaster. I don't give up easily, and I don't settle for mediocrity. But I think more than awards, that's really something that I truly treasure, right?
You've got two powerful words in your branding. There's founding, which means there is a sense of perpetuity, continuity, and beginnings there. And you've got fuel. You chose that name well, I say.
Well, we had to go through an elaborate process, and my brother is a branding expert, so he put us through the ringer. But it I think, came up with something that Manthan really helped. I think Vijay Bhatt was the other person, and our Sridhar. Many people, I think, contributed to it, and I think it in some ways captures the entrepreneurial mindset that we kind of define as our core, as it were.
And even the way the U is written there with that flame, as well as there's a hook that we can see.
That's right.
Very powerful.
That's it. Thank you. Thank you. All credit to Indranil for that and his team.
So we're in the last minute, and those of you who are going to be watching this later, I think there's lots and lots of food for thought that Indrajit has left with us to ponder, to mull over. And, you talked about cutting those clippings and, keeping and filing away things. You obviously have a strong collector element in you. And I hope that this conversation is going to be something that you will also remember as you enjoyed. I hope it was fun. I was very nervous interviewing you today, given that you've interviewed the biggies.
No, not at all. Not at all. You have an elegant style, and you're very calm and collected, and you give space and you listen. So those are the ingredients for any conversation. And it's really been fun being on this show, Deepa. Thank you for inviting me. Really appreciate it. And big thank you to many of the folks in the audience who've kind of joined us this morning. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Indrajit.
And let's carry on the conversation. Yeah.
Look forward to being in touch. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Lovely. Pleasure. Absolutely. Bye. Bye.